Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to the Valentine's Views podcast. If you're listening on Big Blue View Radio, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe there as well. All right, I'm here with Tony DelGenio of Big Blue View, and Tony and I are going to give you the sad post-mortem on Sunday's embarrassing, humiliating, disgusting, disastrous performance by the Giants in a pretty much historic 40-0 loss to the Dallas Cowboys. Tony, how are you today? Have you digested it? Have you recovered? Did you get more sleep than the 3 hours that I got? So how you doing?
Well, now I'm starting to look in mock drafts to see what offensive tackles might be available that we might take in the top 5 next year.
Oh, good Lord. There's so many problems. You know, I heard somebody say on one of the talking heads on the radio this morning talking about whether the Giants would be in the Caleb Williams Derby at the end of the year. you know, I just have to start with this. I think 6 of us picked the game at Big Blue View. 5 of us picked the Giants to win. Hats off to Jeremy Portnoy for actually picking the Cowboys. But I should have known. I said last week that it was kind of a soft prediction, that I picked it because it's set up in a to be a game where if the Giants were ever going to show that they belonged in the class with the Cowboys and by extension with the Eagles, because the Eagles' domination's been the same, that Sunday night set up as the night where that was going to happen. And it obviously didn't happen. It just showed that the Giants, and I don't want to write off the entire season, Tony. I don't want to do that because you feel like doing that at this point. But the Giants are miles and miles and miles from being one of the NFL's big boys, from being in the class with teams like the Cowboys and the Eagles and the Chiefs and the 49ers and those teams that you look at as true championship contenders. They're just miles from that.
And the problem with last night is that you can't really see how many miles away they are, because one particular facet of their team was so tremendously inept last night that it affected everything else. And so I feel that last night did not give us a good take on what the team as a whole is like, but it highlighted a glaring weakness that unfortunately is a central one for any NFL team.
And that, of course, is
the offensive line.
Yeah, it was
and offensive was the right name.
Yeah, it was ugly. You know, the thing of it is, you watch the game and everybody wants to kill Daniel Jones. Okay, everybody wants to kill Daniel Jones, and as I wrote this morning, Jones didn't play well. Jones deserves criticism. But you have to realize that Daniel Jones got sacked 7 times. I think there were 1 or 2 plays where he got sacked that didn't count because of penalties. So it could have been worse. He got hit 12 times when he threw the ball. He ran 13 times last night. And if I was to go back through the film, I think only 2 of those were designed runs, which means on 11 other occasions he was bailing out of the pocket, running for his life. I think the stat was 62% of his dropbacks that he,
something like that.
But it looked worse than that. It had to be worse than that, because he had no chance to play good football last night. None.
Yeah. So PFF just put their grades up for everyone last night, and they have the Giants surrendering 27 pressures.
Ridiculous. And but you see that
pressures. And Dallas,
corresponds. Yep. Go ahead.
yeah,
Go ahead. I'm
and
sorry.
Dallas surrendered 4 pressures. I mean, yeah, to the
But
Giants. And so there's the big difference right there, right? A defensive line that's completely overwhelming one offensive line, and another defensive line that is being easily handled by the other team's offensive line. And there's your game. There's 40-0.
absolutely. It's just, I think in 3 games against the Cowboys now, Jones has been sacked 15 times. And in those 3 games, the Giants haven't sacked a Dallas quarterback 1 time.
Mm-hmm.
And what it tells you, games are won and lost at the line of scrimmage. And right now, the Giants are just no match for the Cowboys at the line of scrimmage on either side of the ball. And they're no match for the Eagles either. You put the playoff game and this game together, and I think it's 78-7.
Yeah, yeah. The last 2 games, they've just been horrendous, and I mean, you hope it's not teams having discovered how they can beat the Giants, but rather just 2 very good teams that happen to match up very favorably with the Giants in that they are both strong on both sides of their line in a way that the Giants are not, certainly not on the offensive side anyway. I mean, to me, the performance of the defensive line is, I mean, not as distressing, but somewhat distressing, because that's supposed to be the strength of the Giants' defense, and the defensive line kind of did nothing last night. But the offensive line, which I think we all in Giants land worry about, our worst fears came true last night. And the problem is, where do the reinforcements come from? On Twitter, you say, people say, oh yeah, the Giants have to go out and find somebody, quick to bring in. But there aren't any good offensive tackles sitting out there waiting to play in the NFL right now.
Those people don't exist. I keep
Yeah.
telling people that. That's why Matt Peart is still the Giants' swing tackle. Matt Peart was not good during the preseason. We get that. But if there was anybody better out there, he would already be in a Giants uniform. It was really, Micah Parsons is otherworldly. Whether he's the second coming of Lawrence Taylor, I mean, I find it sacrilege to even utter the words, but I hear it talked about on talk radio all the time. He's unbelievable. DeMarcus Lawrence is good. The Cowboys can send a lot of pass rushers at the Giants, and yet, you said one of the things you said is, well, the Eagles and the Cowboys, have that strength on the defensive line. Well, those are your primary competitors. Those are and your first responsibility, and Joe Shane and Brian Daboll have done a really good job, since they've been on board. But the first responsibility is to look at the teams you're competing against in your division and make sure you're built to handle those teams. And I had and still have a certain level of optimism about this offensive line. I don't think it's as terrible as it looked last night. And yet you have to come out of last night worrying about Evan Neal. Absolutely worrying about Evan Neal. You have to come out of last night wondering if the guard play is going to be even adequate. You come out of last night worried about the health of Andrew Thomas, who, if you saw the clip on Twitter today, injured his hamstring on the blocked field goal and couldn't move and probably shouldn't have been out there, from after the first series on. It's discouraging. There are no reinforcements coming. There's no cavalry coming during the 2023 season. So and I've said it all along, if Evan Neal doesn't get better, the offensive line doesn't get better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you wonder, at this point how much better he's capable of getting, because as you've said, numerous times before, Evan Neal is a very serious, dedicated football player. He's not the type of guy at tackle that the Giants have had problems with in the past because of their attitude and commitment to work. Evan Neal has done everything he can do, and he's worked in the off season. I don't know whether he should ask for his money back from Duke Manyweather and Willie Anderson or not, but whatever they taught him in the off season, it didn't work last night, and you wonder, after he has tried so hard to improve during the off season, to have a night like that last night. You just don't know what to think about the possibility of him getting better over time. I guess, and the Giants really have little choice but to keep sending him out there in the hopes that it will start to make sense for him. He'll get a little better footwork, and I don't know if you can solve his innate problems with quickness, which seems to be one of his biggest issues. It's also true that he and Mark Glowinski next to each other, they're like two peas in a pod. Mark Glowinski has been actually pretty terrible as a Giant in pass pro, and he was just as bad as Evan Neal was last night. And the thing that I just shake my head at whenever I watch the Giants play the Cowboys is that, when the Giants play them, you're going to see lots of stunts and twists. And as an offensive line, presumably you practice dealing with stunts and twists, and you learn partnership with the guy next to you, so that you can handle them and get a good plan for what to do. But year after year after year after year, the Dallas Cowboys stunt and twist the Giants' offensive line to death. And it goes back to Nate Solder and Will Hernandez. And here we are years later, and it's still happening with Mark Lewinsky and Evan Neal. So I don't know what the answer is there.
I don't know either. And the Giants have thrown a lot of resources at that offensive line. And Evan Neal's a number 7 overall pick. Andrew Thomas is a number 4 overall pick. John Michael Schmitz is a 2nd round pick. These guys, they're spending a lot of resources on this line, and it's discouraging. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about is this idea. You're talking about the stunts, and you're talking about year after year, and one of the things that's really discouraging. Brian Daboll won a Coach of the Year award last year. He was the NFL Coach of the Year. And I'm sorry, I love Dabes. I like talking to Dabes. He's a good guy. He's a terrific coach. But when you open the season playing like that, playing like you had no plan in no possible way to block the players on the other team, when you look completely unprepared and completely overmatched the way that the Giants did, it lands at the foot of the head coach. I want to say, Dabes, did they do the right thing by barely playing starters in the preseason? Did they do the right thing by really being so careful in the offseason, giving guys veteran rest days and backing off players so much? And did they not work guys hard enough? Did they maybe believe their press clippings a little bit too much? Did they think they were better than they are? Which, again, if that's the case and that's in the locker room, that lands at the feet of the head coach too. And what on God's green earth was Daboll thinking in the fourth quarter, leaving Daniel Jones in there to take that pounding? Some of what we saw just has to land at the feet of Daboll.
Yeah, and I think every head coach obviously is open to criticism when things don't go well. And I think right now, for the first time since he became head coach, the Giants are in a little bit of a crisis, period, because again, they're the last 2 times they've gone out on the field, they've gotten, to use Dable's own words, smoked by the opposition, and it's not just any opposition; it's the teams that they have to beat in their division, and so it's a real concern, and yeah, decisions like that do really make you wonder about things. I mean, actually, yeah, we saw it yesterday, actually, with Cincinnati against Cleveland too. That Joe Burrow stayed in the game for a long time before they finally took him out. But that game never got as far out of hand as the Giants game did last night. So, the Cincinnati Cleveland game looked like where the Giants game was just before halftime, basically.
Well, NFL coaches, Tony, NFL coaches, NBA coaches, big time college coaches, you see this all the time. The last one to recognize the truth of the matter, that the white flag should have been run up a while ago, that the game is over, that it's out of hand, that there's no point in keeping your star players out there. The last one to always recognize this seems to be the head coach. And I'm not sure I understand it. I mean, Daboll said last night, he said, well, we just wanted something positive to happen before we got him out of the game. And I'm sorry, it was 40-0. He was getting destroyed on every single drop back. There was never anything positive that was going to happen. The only possible thing that was going to happen was that one of those hits was going to result in him getting hurt and missing a bunch of time. So I just found it inexcusable for him to be in the game that long.
Yeah, agree completely. And if you want to talk about waving flags, you know who did wave a flag? The Dallas Cowboys waved the victory flag fairly early on, and they took Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence and guys like that out of the game, and they put in, they had Oa Digizua playing, they had Dorrance Armstrong playing, they had Dante Fowler playing. Those guys got lots of snaps last night because they were already in their victory formation, figuratively, by the fourth quarter, and so all of their backups were out of the game, all of their backups were in the game, getting lots of snaps. And the most disturbing thing about last night was not all the pressure that the Giants line gave up to Lawrence and Parsons, but that they couldn't even handle the backup defensive linemen that Dallas brought in. Those guys were getting sacks as well.
That is very true. And it just makes you scratch your head. I mean, I looked at this roster. I think we all looked at this roster. We all looked at the moves that the Giants made during the offseason. We all thought bringing in Darren Waller and adding some help at the wide receiver position and drafting John Michael Schmitz in the second round, adding Bobby Okereke. I think everybody felt good that this roster was and is progressing. But to lay that kind of an egg, you don't want to overreact and say the season's already over, but it makes it very, very difficult when you look at the schedule and you look at the fact that the Giants clearly are not a quote unquote big boy in the NFL. It makes it very difficult to see where even 8 or 9 victories are going to come from. It's hard to be optimistic about the big picture of 2023 after what we saw last night.
Yeah, and I think we're all prone to overreacting from what we saw last night, and I'm trying to talk myself into believing that, okay, let's wait another week and let's just see whether they can take care of business in Arizona, and then we'll go from there and see what happens. I also try to say to myself that the offensive line isn't maybe necessarily completely a mess. Obviously, Andrew Thomas's health is concerning, and we hope that hamstring is not something that plagues him for the entire season. But just at least taking the long view of the Giants, okay, we know that Andrew Thomas is the answer at left tackle. John Michael Schmitz, who had a rough first night, especially snapping the ball long, it was his first game in the NFL. The
Mhm.
conditions were terrible. So you know what? I'll give him a pass. I'm still confident that he'll become a good center for the Giants. Ben Bredesen was not awful last night, and so in my mind, I can say to myself that while from the center to the left side of the line, things may be okay. That just still leaves though the right side of the line.
Yeah.
That's a really sore point for the Giants moving forward. We'll see whether they can do any better against Arizona, which is not a great team. Arizona actually put up a good fight against Washington yesterday, and so I don't know that they're as inept as people made them out to be entering the season. But it's a good chance for the Giants to say, you know what, let's recover from this, put it behind us, and next week's a new week. Good Giants teams in the past have played embarrassing games and gone on to something much better. I mean, my favorite example was in 2007 when fairly late in the season, Eli Manning threw 4 interceptions, a couple of them returned as pick sixes in a 41-17 loss to Minnesota at home, in a year in which Minnesota wasn't even a good team, and he was looking awful. And then all of a sudden in the playoffs, things clicked for him and the rest of the team, and they went on to a Super Bowl. And you see actually a lot of those. That same 2017 lost their second game of the year to Green Bay 35-13. And so you can find these things in Giants history of good teams that had terrible days. And so I'm not ready to wave the red flag yet. But if they don't win in Arizona next week, then I think it's a different story, because as you say, they've got lots of tough games coming up early in the season, and they've got to take advantage of the opportunities to win games where they can. And if they can't win in Arizona, then we know that things are likely to be pretty rough for the rest of the season.
Absolutely. I think one of the really truly disappointing things, Tony, is the fact that the Giants were better than expected a year ago. 9-7-1. They win a playoff game. And let's be real. Joe Shane admitted to me at one point that, had they known Daniel Jones would play as well as he did last year, that he never would have declined the 5th-year option, which means he wouldn't have cost himself quite as much money this year. The fact of the matter is that 9-7-1 raised expectations. Okay. It raised expectations. And whether the Giants will admit it or not, it changed the way that they went about this offseason. If they didn't go to the playoffs last year, they weren't swinging a trade for a 31-year-old Darren Waller. They weren't going to spend $40-some million on an off-ball linebacker in Bobby Okereke. They probably would have moved on from some of the players who are still Giants right now. Had they had a 4, 5, 6 win year last year, it raised expectations. We talked a lot about, would there be regression or progression? And the problem with last night is that it just raises the alarm bell that maybe what we saw a year ago wasn't real, that maybe it was a mirage, that and that it could be a long 2023 season.
Yeah, and in thinking about what you're talking about, I'm reminded of the fact that we ran a couple of stories in Big Blue View earlier this year comparing the Giants to the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota Vikings were unexpectedly very successful last year, even more successful than the Giants by a lot during the regular season, even though they wound up losing the playoff game to the Giants. But what did Minnesota do after their great season? They actually kind of tore things down quite a bit. They released Adam Thielen. They let many guys go on defense. They're now with other teams, and so they're doing what looks like a rebuild, even though they had a very good season. And the Giants, as you say, I think you're exactly right. They clearly did not take that approach during the offseason, and had they gone 6-11 last year or something like that, they probably would have approached things differently. So yeah, the pressure is on them. They think that they have a good team, and
Hmm.
for the most part, they may have a good team. It's just that
It's
there are certain places you can't afford to be weak, and although they've tried to strengthen them, it hasn't happened yet.
right.
And
It's
uh, I, you know, this I think all of a sudden, very early in the season, you're gonna have a reckoning with the team where things could go south very quickly, or
Mhm.
it'll be that, oh, week one was just week one, and put it behind us, and things are okay now, or we've gotten our stuff together, and we've woken up. And well, they don't have much time to figure that out. Unfortunately, after Arizona, they go to San Francisco. And if you watched San Francisco yesterday, San Francisco looked like the best team in the NFL before Sunday night, anyway, because they absolutely dominated the Pittsburgh Steelers, a Pittsburgh Steelers team, by the way, that their fans and their coaches have been touting as, maybe a lot better than people thought we were. Well, if you watched Pittsburgh yesterday, they looked awful against San
Mhm.
Francisco, and San Francisco looked like world beaters. It was maybe not quite as bad as what the Giants suffered at Dallas's hands last night, but it was similar to that. And yeah, there's maybe more than one team around the NFL that's waking up this morning saying, "Did we overestimate ourselves?"
Right. And it is very easy to, as we've said a little bit, it's very easy to overreact to week one. There are still 16 games to play. But the overarching point though has to be that the big thing we were hoping for was a sign that this long-term dominance of the NFC East by the Eagles and the Cowboys, that the Giants were, where it's been a split division. It's been the Eagles and the Cowboys at the top and the Giants and the Commanders at the bottom. And the only team that the Giants could consistently and reliably beat has been the Commanders. At some point you're hoping for a sign that those days are ending, and we certainly didn't get it last night. There was so much optimism that we would, whether the Giants won or not, that we would at least get a sign that the Giants were in that discussion, and we obviously got just the opposite.
Yeah, and I think the biggest disappointment is that the Giants played Dallas pretty tough last year. They lost both games, and Dallas clearly deserved to win both games. But the Giants, kind of hung tough in both games. They fought really hard despite the pass protection problems that were similar to what they had last night, but they hung in there, and they had the ball at the end of the game, down 7, with a chance to drive downfield for the tying score. The second game in Dallas, I think they actually were leading at halftime, barely leading at halftime, and then they fell apart in the second half. And if you look at what Dallas did during the offseason, I mean, they made two really nice additions. They added Stephon Gilmore, who's a good cornerback, and he intercepted Jones last night. Although I thought maybe that ball hit the ground, but never mind. And they added Brandon Cooks, who's a nice addition at wide receiver. So those are good things. And I thought, okay, well, they look better as a team. The question was whether having Mike McCarthy call the plays would improve things or be worse than having Kellen Moore do it. But Dallas didn't undergo some tremendous makeover in the offseason. They changed a little bit in a good way, but I thought the Giants changed a little bit, actually more than a little bit, in a good way. And so I think I and many other people were expecting that the Giants could at least trade punches with Dallas now, and it wasn't like the Eagles where the Giants looked completely overmatched every time they played the Eagles last year. Dallas, they didn't look completely overmatched, but last night they looked completely overmatched.
Right. You would have expected that if the Giants were going to quote unquote catch one of those teams, that it would be the Cowboys. And I think that's what made last night so absolutely distressing. And I was sitting in the press box watching people leave 2 minutes into the third quarter. The stadium was practically empty except for Cowboys fans by the beginning of the fourth quarter, and I'm sure that, I mean, that's just distressing coming off such a good season last year. I mean, it was miserable, it was rainy, it was ugly, and of course I couldn't blame anybody for leaving, but not what the Giants wanted. Hopefully 16 games, hopefully it does get better. Hopefully we do get signs of improvement from that offensive line, because if we don't, Daniel Jones is going to either get broken in half or become a completely shell-shocked quarterback who looks at the rush and runs for his life, which is basically what he did last night because he had no choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you worry about your quarterback developing that attitude about things, and some quarterbacks don't worry about that, I think, at all, because they just assume that most of the time the protection's going to be all right. But Jones has never played behind an offensive line, even in college, that allowed him to feel that way.
I think you have to, at some point, you feel that way because it's in your face on every play and you just can't help it. You're a human being, but it is only one game out of 17. There are 16 more to go. The Giants are 4.5-point favorites against Arizona. I mean, you really begin to push the panic button if the Giants can't go to Arizona and beat a team that is obviously tanking for Caleb Williams. But hopefully we don't get to that point. You get to 1-1 and then you go from there and you see what happens, and hopefully things get a little bit better. Tony, before we call it a show, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that today is September 11th, the 22nd year anniversary of that horrible day. Just wanted to mention that, wanted to say that we offer our thoughts to families who lost people on that day. Once again, we offer our thanks to all of the first responders and everybody who puts their lives on the line, every day to protect us. So you just wanted to make mention of that day before we call it a show. I don't know if you had anything you might want to say about that as well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I was in the city that day. I was actually on the subway underground going from Queens to Manhattan at the moment it happened. So at the moment it happened, I wasn't aware of it. And finally, when I made my way up to work on the Upper West Side and walked in, I was told what was going on, and it was surreal. And my father actually at one time worked in the World Trade Center. By that time, no, he was long gone. But so to see that happening at a place where my own father worked for a number of years is something that really hit hard. And my thoughts go out to all of the families who suffered either because their loved ones were killed in the attack itself, or because one of their loved ones was one of the first responders who gave their lives to try to save other people. And hopefully this day is a day when we can all reflect on that and think about what's really important. And a loss to the Cowboys is far down the list of what's important compared to that.
Absolutely. Well said, Tony. All right, with that, I think we'll call it a show. Tony, thank you as always for your insight. Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.